Take the cuffs off her now." "Captain." Harrison's order cracked like a whip through the tense silence on the suburban street. Sergeant Mark Evans stared, bewildered, his hand frozen near the woman in handcuffs. The woman held his gaze, her eyes like ice chips, her voice dangerously quiet, cutting through his confusion. "My name, Sergeant." She stated clearly, each syllable landing with deliberate weight, "is Chief Olivia Hayes." She paused, letting the impossible title hang in the air, heavy and suffocating. "And you." She added the final words, hitting him harder than any physical blow. "Just arrested your boss." The late morning sun cast long, lazy shadows across the manicured lawns of Brookfield, Ohio. It painted the picture of suburban tranquility. Sprinklers whispering across emerald grass, the distant hum of a lawn mower, streets lined with houses that spoke of quiet affluence. It was the kind of place where order felt less like a rule and more like the natural state of things, a place where police patrols were routine, a familiar presence, but rarely, if ever, truly needed. Cruising down Magnolia Drive in his patrol car, Sergeant Mark Evans felt the familiar weight of 20 years on the force settle into his shoulders. One hand rested lightly on the steering wheel, the other idly tapping the console. He knew these streets. He knew the rhythm, the faces, the unspoken rules. Evans had built a reputation, tough, direct, no nonsense. He saw the world in clear lines, order and disorder, right and wrong, those who belonged and those who didn't. Justice, in his view, wasn't complicated. It was about maintaining those lines. And lately Captain Harrison had been emphasizing proactive policing in neighborhoods like this, a point Evans had taken to heart, perhaps a little too rigidly, after that minor complaint last month about his curt demeanor during a traffic stop. He wouldn't make that mistake again. He'd be vigilant. Up ahead, a figure caught his eye, a woman jogging mid-40s. Maybe tall-toned, moving with a confident, steady rhythm that ate up the pavement. Expensive-looking running gear, sleek and black earbuds, firmly in place, lost in her own world. She looked professional, like she could afford to live here, like she belonged. And yet, something pricked at the back of Evan's mind, a dissonance he couldn't immediately name. Maybe it was the way she didn't even glance at his cruiser as it approached. Most people did. A quick nod, a flick of the eyes, an acknowledgement of the uniform, the authority. She didn't. Head up, focused forward, as if he were just another part of the scenery. Or maybe it was the silver Tesla gleaming in the driveway she'd just passed. Had she come from that house? Or was she lingering, observing, casing? The thought, unbidden, slid into his mind, wrapped in the guise of professional caution. Brookfield had seen a small uptick in property crimes recently. Nothing major, but enough to put officers on alert. Enough for Evans to feel the pressure to be ahead of the curve. He slowed the cruiser, pulling smoothly toward the curb, the tires making a soft crunch on the pristine asphalt. He cut the engine. The sudden silence felt amplified. Evans stepped out, placing a deliberate hand on his duty belt. Not reaching for anything, just letting the weight of it be seen, be felt. His eyes, sharp and assessing, locked onto the jogger as she approached her pace, slowing almost reluctantly. She pulled out one earbud, her breathing even controlled despite the exertion. A sheen of sweat glistened on her high cheekbones, which she wiped away with the back of her hand. She didn't look intimidated, didn't look surprised. If anything, she looked inconvenienced. "Something wrong, officer." Her voice was calm, steady though still slightly breathless from her run. Evans didn't answer immediately. He let the silence hang for a beat, establishing control. "Where you coming from?" His tone was level, imbued with the quiet authority he'd perfected over 2 decades, the kind that expected compliance. She blinked her gaze briefly, flicking up the street before returning to him. Home. Just finishing my run. Where's home? A slight tilt of her head, a flicker in her eyes. Was it surprise? Annoyance? Something shifted in her relaxed posture. Couple blocks down, over on Elmwood. Elmwood. Nice street didn't mean anything. Evans pressed on the initial prickle of unease, solidifying into something harder, more definite. Got any ID on you? There it was. The question that changed the temperature of the air. He saw it instantly. The subtle tightening around her eyes, the way her shoulders squared almost imperceptibly. The casual ease vanished, replaced by a careful stillness. For what exactly, she asked, her voice still calm, but now carrying a distinct edge of challenge. Evans lifted his chin slightly, his gaze unwavering. He didn't appreciate being questioned. Not here. Not now. Just need to verify a few things. Ma'am, standard procedure. He knew even as he said it, that it wasn't entirely standard. Not for a jogger in broad daylight in Brookfield, who clearly wasn't breaking any laws, but the dissonance persisted, the feeling that something wasn't right. And Sergeant Mark Evans trusted his gut. Or rather, he trusted the ingrained patterns and biases he mistook for gut instinct. The lines had to be maintained, and in his eyes this interaction, her calm questioning, felt like the beginning of something straying outside those lines. His stance hardened. This wasn't just a routine check anymore. The air on Magnolia Drive, already thick with unspoken tension, grew heavy. Sergeant Mark Evans stood his ground, the very picture of unyielding authority, waiting for the identification he had demanded. Across from him, Olivia Hayes didn't flinch. The slight tightening around her eyes remained a subtle shield against his unwarranted scrutiny. Officer, she began again, her voice measured, deliberately level, despite the circumstance. I appreciate you doing your job, but I am not legally required to carry identification while I'm out for a run in my own neighborhood. You haven't stated any reasonable suspicion of a crime. She paused, letting the words sink in. Frankly, stopping me like this feels an awful lot like harassment. Harassment. The word hung in the quiet air, sharp and accusatory. Evans felt a familiar heat rise in his chest. It wasn't just a challenge anymore. It was an accusation, an attack on his judgment, his authority, right here on this pristine street, with unseen eyes, potentially watching from behind curtained windows. He saw a flicker of movement down the block. Was that Mr. Henderson paused by his prize-winning roses. Further down near the corner, a man in a business suit stood by a parked car, seemingly talking on his phone, yet his gaze felt directed this way. Evans pushed the fleeting thought aside. He wouldn't be intimidated or questioned by her. His internal narrative immediately reframed her calm assertion of rights. Argumentative, non-compliant, obstructive. She knew the rules, he thought bitterly. People like her always knew just how far they could push, how to twist words to make the officer look bad. That pressure he felt, the need to be proactive, the sting of that previous complaint, coiled tighter inside him. He couldn't back down now. It would look weak. It would look like he'd made a mistake. Ma'am, I'm conducting an investigation based on suspicious activity. He stated, his voice clipped, devoid of the forced politeness from moments before. Your refusal to cooperate is noted. Hayes let out a short, incredulous breath. Suspicious activity? You mean jogging? Jogging past a parked car? The absurdity of it sharpened her tone. This is ridiculous. I have rights. Everyone has rights, Evans countered smoothly, falling back on practiced lines, and I have a duty to ensure the safety and security of this neighborhood. Now are you going to provide identification, or do I need to take this further? Frustration finally breached Hayes's composure, flashing in her eyes. She shifted her weight, her hand moving towards the small fitness tracker pouch strapped to her upper arm, where her phone was likely secured. You know what? Fine. Let me just call someone who can explain the law to you properly, because clearly that was it. The movement towards the pouch. The mention of calling someone. In Evans' heightened state, fueled by perceived defiance and ingrained suspicion, the action translated instantly dangerously, reaching for something, calling for backup, trying to record him to make trouble. He didn't wait to find out. His training, twisted by years of unexamined bias, screamed threat neutralization. He reacted before he could consciously think. Evans surged forward, closing the small distance between them in 2 quick strides. His hand shot out, grabbing her wrist before she could fully reach her phone pouch. The contact was abrupt, shocking. What the get your hands off me? Hayes gasped, wrenching back instinctively, her eyes wide with disbelief and sudden sharp anger. But Evans was already moving, fueled by adrenaline, and the conviction he was controlling a rapidly deteriorating situation. He twisted her arm, leveraging her surprise and off-balance posture. She struggled strong and wiry, but he had the advantage of weight training and sheer aggressive intent. With practiced efficiency, he forced her arm up behind her back. Metal flashed in the sunlight. The sharp, distinct click echoed in the quiet street as the first handcuff snapped shut around her wrist, followed quickly by the second. Click, click. The sound was brutally final, irreversible. Olivia Hayes stood rigid, breathing hard through her nose, the cold steel biting into her skin. Her eyes, when they met, Evans blazed with a fury that was ice-cold, controlled yet utterly consuming. Sergeant Mark Evans stood back, slightly chest-heaving, gripping her cuffed arms firmly. He had regained control. He had neutralized the situation. He had done his job, or so he thought. He hadn't yet realized that the definitive click of the handcuffs wasn't an ending, but the fuse being lit on a bomb that was about to detonate his entire world. The point of no return had been crossed. The click of the handcuffs echoed a sharp metallic punctuation mark in the otherwise quiet suburban street. Sergeant Mark Evans tightened his grip on Olivia Hayes's arms, his knuckles white. He tried to project an air of finality, of procedure followed, but a tremor ran beneath the surface. He avoided looking directly into Hayes's eyes, which he could feel burning into the side of his face. He fumbled slightly with the radio clipped to his shoulder. Dispatch, he began, his voice a fraction too loud, betraying the tension he fought to conceal. 7 Adam 14, requesting transport. 1 female suspect in custody. Charge is obstruction of cancel. That transport, Sergeant. The voice cut through the air like a razor, sharp and cold. It wasn't loud, but it carried an undeniable weight of command that made Evans freeze mid-sentence. He turned slowly. A sleek, unmarked black SUV had pulled up silently behind his cruiser. Standing beside it was Captain James Harrison. Tall, impeccably uniformed, his face set in lines of deep displeasure. Harrison's steely gaze swept over the scene. Evans, the cuffed woman, breathing steadily, but radiating fury at the small cluster of neighbors watching with rapt attention. 1 phone held high, recording everything Evans saw the man in the business suit who had been lingering down the street give a brief, almost imperceptible nod towards the captain, before discreetly stepping back. Harrison strode forward, his movements precise, economical. He stopped a few feet away, his eyes locking on to Evans. The air crackled. The neighbors fell silent. Even the distant lawn-mower seemed to pause. "Sergeant Evans." Harrison said, his voice dangerously calm. "Report. Now, what exactly is going on here?" Evans swallowed the practiced justifications, suddenly feeling flimsy, inadequate. "Sir," he stammered, gesturing vaguely towards Hayes. This individual, she was acting suspiciously, refused to provide identification when requested, became non-compliant and obstructive during my investigation. I placed her under arrest. Harrison's eyes didn't leave Evans, but his gaze sharpened, dissecting the explanation, finding it wanting. He took another step closer. Suspicious activity. She was jogging Sergeant in broad daylight, obstructive, or asserting her rights. He didn't wait for an answer. His gaze flicked briefly, almost imperceptibly towards Hayes, a flicker of something unreadable. Recognition. Then back to Evans, colder than before. "Take the cuffs off her." The order was quiet but absolute. Evans blinked, momentarily confused. Had he heard correctly, sir? But she refused to identify. She was resisting. I didn't stutter. Sergeant Harrison interrupted his voice, dropping to a low growl that sent a chill down Evans's spine. Despite the warm sun, I said, "Take the cuffs off her now." Hesitation warred with the ingrained instinct to obey a direct command from a superior officer. Evans' hands hovered near the cuffs, his mind racing, failing to reconcile the situation. Why was the captain ordering him to release a suspect? Why the fury in his eyes? Harrison, seeing the delay, took a decisive step towards Hayes. His voice softened, though the underlying steel remained. "Chief," he said, the single word slicing through Evans' confusion like a blade. "My apologies for this unacceptable situation. Are you all right, Chief?" The word registered in Evans's brain, but the implication was too large, too impossible to grasp immediately. He stared uncomprehending as Hayes gave a stiff nod, her jaw tight. "I'm fine, Captain," she replied, her voice tight with controlled anger. "Just inconvenienced." Harrison acknowledged her curt response with a grimace, then turned his full icy attention back to the bewildered Sergeant Evans. The final piece of the puzzle, the one Evans hadn't even known was missing, was about to fall into place with devastating force. "Sergeant Evans," Captain Harrison said, his voice lethally quiet, each word spaced for maximum impact. "Do you have any idea who you just assaulted and unlawfully detained?" The world seemed to slow down. Evans could hear the blood pounding in his ears. He saw the shocked faces of the onlookers, the relentless red light of the recording phone. He looked at the woman in handcuffs, the jogger, the suspect, and then back at his captain's thunderous expression. The pieces clicked into place with a sickening lurch. Chief Captain Harrison calling her Chief. The unmarked car. The instant deference. The fury before Evans could even form a coherent thought. The woman he had manhandled spoke again. Her voice, though quiet, carried across the stunned silence of the street, clear, sharp, and utterly devastating. "My name, Sergeant," she said, holding his gaze, her eyes like chips of obsidian, "is Olivia. Hayes, Chief. Olivia." Hayes. She paused, letting the full weight of her title, her position, her identity crash down upon him. "And you," she finished, her voice dropping almost to a whisper, yet hitting him harder than any shout. "Just arrested your boss." The ground fell away beneath Mark Evans' feet. The sun seemed too bright, the air too thin. He felt the eyes of the world on him. The neighbors, the man in the suit, his captain, and the chief of police, whose wrists were still bound by his handcuffs. The world had tilted, fractured and shattered, leaving him exposed utterly irrevocably. Wrong time seemed to warp on Magnolia Drive. Sergeant Mark Evans stood frozen, the world a blur of shocked faces, the distant sound of traffic, and the impossible reality hammered home by Chief Olivia Hayes's calm, authoritative voice. Chief Olivia Hayes. The name reverberated in the hollow space where his certainty used to reside. Sergeant Captain Harrison's voice snapped him back. It was sharp, impatient, laced with undisguised fury. I gave you an order. Uncuff the chief, now. Galvanized by the direct command, Evans moved his limbs, feeling heavy, disconnected. His hands trembled as he fumbled with the handcuff key, the small piece of metal suddenly alien in his grip. He finally managed to unlock the first cuff, then the second, stepping back quickly, as Chief Hayes slowly lowered her arms, rubbing the angry red marks circling her wrists. The sight made Evans's stomach churn. Hayes didn't immediately turn away. She took a half step towards him, her eyes locking onto his. Her voice was low-pitched just for him and the captain, but it carried the force of a physical blow, 20 years on the force. Sergeant, she began, her tone deceptively soft, yet cutting deep. 20 years seeing this city, its people. Tell me something. She paused, letting the question hang, demanding his attention. When you looked at me, what did you really see? Was it my running shoes that seemed suspicious? The pace I kept? Her eyes narrowed fractionally. Or was it my skin? The question landed like a physical strike, stealing the air from Evans's lungs. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. What could he say? The justifications that had seemed so solid in his mind just minutes ago now felt like dust, flimsy and false under the weight of her gaze, under the undeniable truth of his actions. He had profiled his own chief of police based on nothing more than her race and his own ingrained, ugly bias. Captain Harrison stepped forward, then his face grim. Sergeant Mark Evans, he announced formally, his voice carrying clearly for all the onlookers and the still-recording phone to capture. Pursuant to departmental regulations, you are hereby relieved of duty, effective immediately pending the outcome of a full internal affairs investigation. He held out his hand. Palm up your badge and your service weapon. Now each word was a nail hammered into the coffin of Evans's career as he knew it. Numbly mechanically, he unclipped the familiar weight of his badge from his uniform shirt. The metal felt cold, heavy. He placed it in Harrison's waiting palm. Then his hands, shaking slightly more. He unholstered his sidearm, ejected the magazine, cleared the chamber with practiced movements that felt utterly foreign now, and handed the weapon over as well. The click of the slide locking back seemed deafeningly loud. He felt stripped bare, not just of his authority, but of his identity. The weight of the neighbor's stares, the silent judgment, the inescapable lens of the camera. It was a public crucifixion. He didn't remember walking back to his personal vehicle parked down the street. Didn't remember Captain Harrison curtly dismissing him, telling him to go home and await contact from internal affairs. He just found himself sitting behind the wheel, the engine off, staring blankly through the windshield, as the official vehicles, including the chief's black SUV, eventually pulled away, leaving Magnolia Drive to return to its deceptive tranquility. Later that evening, the numbness had receded, replaced by a gnawing, sickening crawl of anxiety, and a confusion so profound it left him breathless. He sat alone in the sterile quiet of his small den. The official email notification of the IA investigation glowing accusingly on his laptop screen. Allegations, unlawful detention, abuse of authority, conduct, unbecoming potential, bias-based profiling. The words swam before his eyes. He tried to piece it together to find the old justifications. She didn't comply immediately. She questioned me, reached for her phone, But the images kept flooding back, Hayes's calm face turning sharp with indignation, the click of the cuffs, the fury in Harrison's eyes, the red marks on the chief's wrists, and her voice low and searing. Or was it my skin? Was it? Had he truly become the kind of cop he'd always claimed to despise? The one who saw suspicion based on appearance, not action. He thought back to that minor complaint last month, the captain's vague warnings about needing to be more proactive, but also smarter. Had he twisted that pressure into a license for prejudice, he caught his reflection in the dark screen of the laptop, the tired eyes, the deep lines etched around his mouth. He looked like a stranger, a guilty stranger. The official email contained a name and number. Lieutenant Davies' Internal Affairs Division Standard Procedure dictated he secure union representation immediately. He knew the name of the lawyer everyone called when things went south. Aggressive, skilled at finding loopholes, painting the officer as the victim of circumstance or misunderstanding. It was the expected move. The smart move, some would say. Protect yourself at all costs. His hand hovered over his phone. He could make the call right now. Lawyer up. Build his defense. Maybe argue Hayes had been intentionally provocative, testing him. Maybe focus on procedure on his right to investigate suspicious. What jogging? His stomach roiled. The lies felt like ashes in his mouth before he even formed them. He looked back at the IA notification. Lieutenant Davies. He didn't know him personally, but Davies had a reputation for being thorough fare, but uncompromisingly by the book. Calling him directly without representation would be procedural suicide. Or would it? What was he trying to save here? His career or some shred of the man he thought he was? The phone felt impossibly heavy in his hand. He stared at the screen, the contact information for the hardline union lawyer readily available. It was the safe play, the path of least resistance, the one that kept the walls of denial firmly in place. Then his thumb moved, hovering over a different contact. Not the lawyer, not Lieutenant Davies. Someone else entirely. A former partner, years retired, a man known for his quiet integrity and brutal honesty. Someone Evans hadn't spoken to in ages, but who had once told him, "The job doesn't make you dirty, Mark, unless you let it." His finger paused, trembling slightly. Who should he call? The lawyer who would fight for his badge, or the old friend who might force him to confront his soul? The choice felt monumental, a crossroads reached in the wreckage of his own making. What path would Sergeant Mark Evans take now? The call to Dave Miller had been like plunging into ice water. Evans hadn't spoken to his retired former partner in nearly 3 years. Not since Miller had left the force, quietly disillusioned. But faced with the wreckage of his career, Evans had bypassed the aggressive union lawyer's number and dialed the man known for his unflinching honesty. The conversation was brief, brutal. Miller hadn't offered easy comfort or legal loopholes. He'd listened, sighed heavily, and then delivered the advice Evans hadn't wanted, but desperately needed to hear. Stop digging, Mark. Stop trying to justify it. Tell the truth, the whole damn truth, even the parts that make you look like an idiot. Maybe you save your job. Maybe you don't. But maybe you save whatever's left of yourself. The words echoed as Evans navigated the disorienting void of mandatory administrative leave, or days blurred into a monotonous cycle of staring at walls, fielding awkward calls from concerned colleagues, and avoiding others, and replaying the incident on Magnolia Drive until his head throbbed. The official summons from Lieutenant Davies and the Internal Affairs Division arrived stark and unavoidable. He walked into the sterile IAD interview room, feeling stripped bare. Miller's advice, a cold weight in his gut. Lieutenant Davies was younger than Evans expected. Sharp-eyed professional, his demeanor giving nothing away. There was no aggression, just meticulous questions. A calm request for Evans' account of the stop. The escalation, the arrest, Evans, following Miller's stark counsel, recounted the events he didn't embellish, didn't omit his initial assessment of Chief Hayes, his demand for ID, her questioning him, his interpretation of her reaching for her phone pouch. When Davies pressed, "Why did you perceive her actions as obstructive?" Sergeant, why the immediate escalation to arrest Evans, hesitated. The old defensiveness flared. She argued. She didn't comply, but Miller's voice echoed, "Stop digging." He swallowed hard. I interpreted her questioning as defiance, Lieutenant. Her reaching for the phone, I perceived it as a potential threat or an attempt to impede the stop. He couldn't bring himself to say the word bias, aloud not yet. But he didn't offer the usual flimsy excuses either. He reported what he did and what he thought at the time. However flawed, Davies just made notes, his expression unreadable. Part of the mandated process was sensitivity and implicit bias training. Evans found himself in a bland conference room with a dozen other officers, all wearing variations of the same sullen, resentful expression. He sat through presentations on cultural competency, watched videos depicting scenarios uncomfortably close to his own actions, participated grudgingly in role-playing exercises. He felt mostly cynical, resistant, more bureaucratic hoops, he thought, trying to teach old dogs new tricks. Then came a specific module. It involved personal stories, anonymized from citizens who had experienced bias-based policing. One account, read aloud by the facilitator, described a black man, a successful architect, being repeatedly stopped in his own affluent neighborhood, the constant suspicion eroding his sense of belonging, making him feel like a perpetual outsider in his own home. The details were different, but the underlying feeling, the assumption of guilt based on appearance, the quiet humiliation, struck a chord deep within Evans. He saw Chief Hayes's face in his mind, heard her quiet question, "Or was it my skin?" For the first time, it wasn't just an accusation. It felt like a glimpse into a lived reality he had actively, arrogantly ignored. It wasn't an epiphany, not a sudden conversion, but it was a crack, a disturbing, uncomfortable crack in the wall of his denial. While Evans grappled with his suspension, the ripples of the Magnolia Drive incident spread through the department. Chief Olivia Hayes, maintaining outward composure, addressed her command staff. Without referencing the specific event directly, she announced an immediate review and reinforcement of the department's anti-profiling policies, alongside expanded mandatory implicit bias training for all ranks, starting immediately. This department, she stated firmly, her gaze sweeping the room, must not only uphold the law but embody fairness. We must serve all citizens with equal respect. No exceptions. She was turning a damaging incident into an impetus for needed change. Captain Harrison, meanwhile, dealt with the administrative fallout. He fielded calls from a frustrated union president demanding why Evans hadn't been provided the standard aggressive defense. Harrison stood firm, stating simply that the IAD investigation would proceed based on facts and policy. He supported the chief's initiatives publicly and privately, understanding that leadership meant setting the right tone, even when it was difficult. Weeks bled into months. The IAD investigation concluded finding Evans had violated multiple departmental policies, including abuse of authority, and demonstrating conduct consistent with bias-based profiling. The case moved to a formal disciplinary review board, Evans accompanied now by a more pragmatic, less confrontational union representative Miller had recommended, faced 3 senior officers. He didn't contest the core facts presented by Lieutenant Davis. Chief Hayes provided a brief professional statement via written deposition, focusing solely on the events, not offering personal opinions or recommendations on discipline. When Evans was offered the chance to speak, he stood hands clasped behind his back. His voice was low, stripped of its former authority. He didn't make excuses. He acknowledged the facts presented. He stated he had initiated a stop without reasonable suspicion, had escalated the situation unnecessarily, and had made an arrest that was not justified by policy or law. He admitted his judgment had been profoundly flawed. He concluded simply, "I accept responsibility for my actions and their consequences." He didn't ask for leniency. The board deliberated. The wait felt like an eternity. Finally, they rendered their decision. It wasn't termination, which surprised him. Instead, a significant demotion from sergeant back to patrol officer, a 1-year suspension without pay retroactive to his leave date, meaning several more months, unpaid, mandatory, ongoing psychological counseling focused on bias and, upon reinstatement assignment, to a different precinct under close supervision with required participation in specific community outreach programs. It was severe career-altering, but it wasn't the end. It was perhaps a chance, albeit a brutal one, to rebuild the decision landed heavily. Suspension, demotion, counseling outreach. It was a public shaming, and a long road back, if he even wanted to take it. That night, sitting alone again, Evans didn't feel relief, just the crushing weight of the verdict. He thought about quitting, walking away entirely. But then he remembered the training video, the architect's story, the flicker of uncomfortable truth he'd felt. He remembered Miller's words, "Save whatever's left of yourself." He opened his laptop not to look for jobs, but to hesitantly search for information on the community outreach programs the board had mandated. It was a small action, almost involuntary, but it was the first concrete step on a path he never thought he'd walk, a path away from the wreckage towards something unknown. 18 months later. The humid summer air hung heavy over the streets of the Warrensville Heights precinct, a world away from the manicured lawns of Brookfield officer Mark Evans. No longer sergeant settled into the worn seat of his patrol car, the familiar rhythm of the night shift replacing the sharp edges of anxiety that had once consumed him. The year-long suspension had been humbling the subsequent reinstatement to patrol duty under close supervision, even more so. The mandatory counseling sessions had been unexpectedly grueling, forcing him to dissect prejudices he hadn't known he possessed, layer by painful layer. The community outreach initially dreaded had opened his eyes to perspectives he'd spent 20 years ignoring. He wasn't the same man. The hard certainty was gone, replaced by a cautious vigilance, not for threats, but against his own flawed instincts. He listened more. Now, observed more. Spoke less. He second-guessed his assumptions, a constant internal check that was exhausting but necessary. A call came over the radio. A potential trespasser reported at a small strip mall, described vaguely as a male acting suspiciously near the loading dock. Old habits died hard. A flicker of the old suspicion, the urge to assume the worst, surfaced. Evans took a slow breath, deliberately pushing it down. Observe, assess. Don't assume. He arrived to find a young black man sitting on the curb behind the closed stores, sketching in a notebook under the dim security lights. He wasn't trespassing, merely finding a quiet spot. A year and a half ago, Evans knew he would have approached, aggressively demanded. ID questioned his presence. Tonight was different. Evans parked a respectful distance away, got out, slowly, leaving his hand away from his belt. "Evening," he called out his voice, neutral, Everything all right back here? The young man looked up, startled, then visibly relaxed slightly, seeing Evans' non-confrontational posture. Oh yeah, officer. Just sketching. It's quiet here. All right. Evans nodded. Just checking on a call. Stores are closed back here. Be mindful of the time. He didn't ask for ID. Didn't ask what he was sketching. Didn't imply he didn't belong. A brief, professional, respectful interaction. He got back in his car and drove away, leaving the young man to his art. It felt right simple. The way it should have been all along. A few weeks later, during a multi-precinct briefing at headquarters, he saw Chief Hayes at the front of the room, outlining a new citywide expansion of the youth outreach program he was now required to participate in. She looked tired, perhaps carrying the weight of her position, but her voice was strong, her vision clear. Their eyes met briefly across the crowded room. There was no animosity in her gaze, nor was there warmth, just a neutral professional acknowledgement. She nodded curtly, including him among the officers she addressed, then continued her presentation. It was enough, a silent, uneasy truce, an acknowledgement that he was still here, doing the work, hopefully learning. He also occasionally saw Captain Harrison. Their interactions were similarly professional clipped. Harrison never referenced the incident on Magnolia Drive, but Evans felt the weight of his continued scrutiny, a silent reminder that trust once shattered is painstakingly rebuilt, if ever fully restored. Later that night, nearing the end of his shift, Evans drove slowly down a quiet residential street in Warrensville Heights. Lamplight pooled on the sidewalks. Ahead, under the orange glow, a figure was jogging, a woman fit and focused earbuds in moving with purpose. For a fleeting second, his breath caught. The image was jarringly familiar. He watched her approach, pass, and continue down the street, oblivious to his patrol car. He didn't slow down further, didn't reach for his radio, didn't feel the prickle of unfounded suspicion. He saw only a citizen exercising, enjoying the cool night air. He drove on, turning the corner, the rhythmic sound of her retreating footsteps fading behind him. The peace, he felt, wasn't triumphant. It was quiet, fragile, hard-earned. The scars remained, the demotion, the lost trust, the constant internal vigilance against the biases he now knew lurked within. Change wasn't a destination reached, but a path walked daily. And for Officer Mark Evans, the path stretched long ahead, winding through the uneasy quiet of the city night one, deliberately different step at a time. What a journey we've just witnessed. A single moment born from an unchallenged assumption spiraled into consequences that irrevocably changed lives. Officer Evans's story is a stark reminder of how easily perception can be clouded and how deeply ingrained biases can operate beneath the surface, even when we believe we're just doing our job. Isn't it true that sometimes the hardest mirror to look into is the one reflecting our own flaws? The path towards acknowledging a mistake, truly understanding its impact, and beginning the painstaking work of change. It's never a straight line, is it? It requires courage, humility, and a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths, both within ourselves and within the systems we are part of. Chief Hayes's strength and Captain Harrison's integrity also remind us of the profound impact good leadership can have even in difficult circumstances. This story left us thinking deeply about the slow, often unseen effort it takes to rebuild trust and reshape perspectives. What resonated most with you on this journey? We'd genuinely love to hear your reflections in the comments. Here's a question for you. What do you believe is the biggest challenge someone faces when trying to overcome deeply ingrained biases, like the path Officer Evans is now on. Share your valuable perspective below. If this story touched you or sparked some thought, please show your support with a like. And if you feel this story carries a message that might resonate with others or encourage understanding, please consider sharing it. For more stories that delve into the complexities of human experience and explore pathways to change and empathy, make sure you subscribe to our channel and click the notification bell so you won't miss our next journey together. Thank you so much for watching and for being part of this thoughtful community. Remember to lead with understanding in your own interactions. We'll see you in the next story.